Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be hosting today's webinar titled Living Well with Fatigue in People with Scleroderma. It's our second webinar during this special month of Scleroderma Awareness Month, and I am very pleased to be joined by our expert speaker, Lucy Reeve. Lucy, how are you? It's a pleasure having you on today.
I'm good, Zobair. Hello, and hello to everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Fantastic. I can already see we've got 36 participants and growing. Let's take a look at who's joined us so far. So we have Annie, we have Barbara, Claire. Good morning, Ellie, Hillary, and it's growing. Let's give it a few minutes to try and get as many of our attendees to join. So a little bit of information about our expert speaker, Lucy, is that Lucy is a clinical specialist occupational therapist, currently working in the pain management team in the Norfolk and Norwich University Hospital. She has been working in rheumatology and pain management for over 25 years. She herself was diagnosed with scleroderma in 2004, so she has both personal and professional experience in this area. A little bit about the webinar in terms of the format is that it will be split into two parts. One will be Lucy's presentation, and this will be followed by part two, which will be the Q&A, which will give you all the opportunity to send in your questions live and interactive for me to put to Lucy. This presentation will be about all things fatigue. This involves managing, adapting, equipment, tips, and alternatives, among other key points. If you are finding these webinars to be very helpful and you'd like to support future webinars, you can do so by making a donation of £5 during this month of Scleroderma Awareness Month. You can do so by texting SRUK SAM to 70450. Text costs £5 plus one standard rate message, and I will put all of that information in the chat very shortly. But for now, I'm very happy to now hand over to Lucy, who will be sharing her screen and beginning her presentation. So thank you, Lucy.
Right, I'm hoping you can all say that. Zobair will check in with me and say he can.
Thank you, Lucy.
Right, good morning, everybody. So we're looking today from an occupational therapy point of view about how you live with fatigue. Now, fatigue is one of those concepts that I don't think there's many people who don't experience that when they live with fatigue. And actually, out of all the symptoms that we can live with when we have scleroderma, fatigue can actually be often the most difficult one to live with. And so let's have a little look at some of the concepts of that. And I'm going to talk through some of the cycles that we can get into when we have fatigue, and then hopefully look at some strategies to manage that. Now you'll notice on this, there's going to be an animal theme to this. Now I apologize for that, but hopefully it will make sense as we go along. So I've tried to find a slide here of how fatigue makes you feel. And this is what I came up with. Here it is, it's a sloth. Now this is how fatigue makes me feel. I feel like I just need to lie down in a darkened room and just hope it'll all go away and somebody will come and do things. And sometimes you'll all be aware that you just think, I cannot put another foot in front of another. I cannot do another task, and I just want the world to leave me alone. And so this is summing up how it often feels. And the difficulty with this is that fatigue feels really horrible, and so it can stop us doing a lot of things. But if we stop doing everything that we want to, then we can get into a negative cycle. And this cycle plays out a little bit like this. Fatigue feels like we really can't do anymore. So we stop doing things and we feel that we need to rest more. And the difficulty, and Will was talking about this in his talk the other week on the physiotherapy management of fatigue. But if we're doing less and less, then our body can quickly become quite deconditioned because we're not doing any activity. And also as human beings, we love to do things. We like to achieve things, gives us meaning and purpose. So if we're not doing anything, then our mood can also become very low and we can lose motivation. So it becomes a very vicious cycle. Fatigue feels horrible. We stop doing things. We rest more. We become more deconditioned. we lose mood, we lose motivation, and then we don't really want to do anything. And because our bodies have become quite weak and sometimes stiffer, then we also can then have more pain as well as more fatigue and more limitations. So this is one of the cycles that we really want to avoid getting into. Now, here comes our second concept in terms of animals. And this is a question. Now, if you all remember the Aesop's fable about a hare and a tortoise who ran a race. And most of us, in my experience, are hares. So most of us, we've got a big to-do list. We rush about wanting to do things. And we often hate the fact that we're limited anyway. We want to do things. So this is, often we will fight against it. Nobody wants to have fatigue. And so you'll often find that people will determinedly push themselves on. And we all have ideas like, I've started, so I need to finish something. I won't let this beat me. I will push on regardless. Or we might all have ideas like, other people are expecting this of me. I'll feel guilty if I don't do this. Nobody else can do it as well as I can. I've got so much to do. I'd rather get it finished, even if it kills me. All these types of things play out. And so we often get into this hare scenario where we're push, push, push. And this plays out in another one of the cycles, which is what we often refer to as boom and bust. When we have a good day, it's like a window of opportunity. And we're like, I don't feel too bad. There's that morning check-in. How do you feel today? I don't feel too bad. I really need to get all these things on my to-do list done whilst I can. And so we've got a bit more energy, and then we push and push and push, and then boom, we hit the ground and we find that we have done too much, and then we increase our fatigue. This is that bust. And then we need a lot of time to rest and recover. Then we go back to that cycle again. As soon as we've got a bit more energy, there it is, it's a good day again. We do too much. We end up in this boom and bust cycle. And this looks a little bit like this if we put it up on a graph. And we do this because it's really normal. It is normal to use your energy as a guide. When you've got some more energy, you want to do more. When you are more fatigued, you tend to rest more. But the difficulty with this, if you see this cycle, this boom and bust, is if you do this all the time, so you push yourself to the absolute limits when you've got energy, and then you crash, over time, the amount that we can do on a good day tends to get smaller, and it takes longer and longer. Here we are. Takes longer and longer to recover when we've overdone it. So you might find that, when you used to push yourself, it took you about an afternoon to get back to normal. But over time, it now takes you 2 or 3 days or a week if you've really pushed yourself. So over time, the amount you can do reduces. And it becomes more and more frustrating because you're just not able to do the things that you used to do. And you feel that you're just able to achieve less and less. So here we are. This is, in terms of that fable, this is about being a tortoise. And if we remember the tortoise, it plodded along, it kept doing stuff, and eventually it beat the hare because it didn't need a long time to recover because it had just kept consistently doing amounts of activity. So this is about doing less more often. This is about trying to find a consistent level of activity that you can manage most days. This is often what is referred to as pacing. I'm sure somebody will have heard of this term. Pacing is often what we call a Marmite word, in the sense that people often find that they think that pacing is all about doing nothing, and it's not that at all. It's about trying to do what is on your to-do list in a more effective way. So it's about trying to find a consistent, manageable level of activity that you can do every day. So you aren't pushing yourself to the limits when you have that good day, but equally you're not then spending long periods of recovering. So actually it becomes a more efficient way. You're trying to follow that red line as opposed to our green up and down line. So what is pacing in this sense? Well, pacing is essentially just about knowing your body. How much of an activity can you do without pushing yourself to the absolute limits? Now, often I refer to this as a 70% rule. So if you can do something and you've still got a bit more capacity, you're not pushing to your 100%, then this is a good place to be because you've still got some, well, we'll call it juice in the tank. You've still got some room for maneuver there. often if you think about, well, what could I do on a bad day? That can be a really good baseline to start from. So you know that if you could comfortably do, say, 10 minutes of an activity on a bad day, then you will easily be able to manage that on a good day. And you could probably comfortably do that every day without pushing yourself to your limits. So that's often a really good place to start. Essentially, what pacing is about stopping before you need to. So we're not using that fatigue as our guide of when to stop an activity. We're not just keeping going until we absolutely can't do anymore. You know, we're not going for a walk and thinking, right, I'll just keep going. Now I can't go anymore. And that, actually, I've got to now get back. We're thinking, well, I need to stop when I'm still comfortable. And what's going to happen is that because we are so reliant on often our fatigue to tell us, that we'll probably think, oh, I could just get this finished, or I could just get that done, or so we'll still be comfortable. So we'll probably still have that tendency to push ourselves. So this is actually when it can be really useful to have something like a timer, so you don't go over the time that you've set for yourself. And there's lots of ways to do that. Obviously, you can use your phone, or you can use your watch, or if you've got an Alexa at home, you can have Alexa tell you when to stop. But it's just trying to get into the way of knowing what your comfortable limit is. What could I comfortably do in sitting or standing or moving or any particular activity, and stopping yourself so you've still got some capacity. And pacing is also about thinking about those activities, and if we've got baselines, then if we break up activities into more manageable chunks of activity, then we can do small amounts regularly. And we're also thinking about trying to change your activity regularly and change our position regularly. So we're trying all the time to vary between sit and stand and move, and heavy tasks and light tasks, and things you like and things you don't like, so that we're trying to allow our body time to adjust and trying to keep ourselves on a more even keel in terms of our energy levels. And what we're doing is also we're interspersing activity with frequent short breaks. So we do something, then we take a break, do something, then take a break. Now, a break doesn't necessarily have to be about you lying down somewhere. It can just be, you know, that old saying, change is as good as a rest. So that can be that. I'll tell you a context of what I mean by this is, let's think we've got Queen's, I don't know if you're tennis fans out there, we've got Queen's on at the minute, and we will be having Wimbledon. We missed it last year, but we'll be having Wimbledon. Now let's think about what tennis players do. Now you get your tennis players, they come out onto the court. Now they've only played one game, and there they are. They're off, sitting, having a banana or a bit of squash. And you think, well, they've hardly done anything. And then they come out, they play another couple of games, and then they're off again, having another rest. So they're doing and recovering, doing and recovering. We're not saying, you know, we're not saying to Andy Murray, well, we just expect you to come out on that tennis court and just keep playing until you can't play anymore. That would mean that they probably could hardly play for nearly as long as they do. And some of these matches are very long. And that's a bit like what we're talking about here. So we're doing a bit recovering, doing a bit recovering. A bit like a friend of mine refers to it as when you're charging your mobile phone, you know, you think, oh, I can't be bothered to charge my mobile phone. So you let it run all the way down on the battery. And then it takes you forever to charge your battery again. So we're a bit like that. We need to keep recharging our battery. And what we end up with is a more balanced pattern of activity. So we're doing a bit and we're varying our tasks. So you can see here, we've got a range of different tasks with short breaks in between. And that's a pattern to get into. Now, as we said, it's unlikely that we're going to do this left to our own devices, because we'll still probably think, oh, how do I feel? So we need to plan. So often it can be really helpful to use an activity diary. Think about what's on that to-do list and plot it out so that you have got things scheduled, so you know they'll happen. And then you can deliberately plan that varied activity. I often find that the people who manage their fatigue best are the ones who have a daily routine. So if you have a consistent pattern of activity where you usually get up at the same time, have your breakfast at the same time, do your routine tasks, have times when you eat regularly, have rest breaks planned, do your movement and exercise, or do specific tasks. If they're always are roughly the same pattern, you tend to stick to that. And if you've already got them planned in there, it's harder to ignore those rest breaks. The other thing you can ask yourself is, when am I at my best? Well, if you're anything like me, your best is probably not first thing in the morning. You wake up, rigor mortis has set in. This is not going to be your best time to be active. But maybe by about 11 o'clock, that's your best time to be active. So that might be a good time to plan in the slightly more tricky tasks that take a bit more energy. So thinking about that. Life doesn't always play ball, and so sometimes we will have things in our diary which are going to be particularly challenging or busy. So we need to think around those tasks. So if you've got a particularly challenging task that is going to come up, maybe you've got a hospital appointment, or maybe you're going out to see a friend, or maybe you're going to do your shopping and it's a bit more challenging in terms of your energy, you need to plan around with it. Don't have everything on one day. Have a quieter day before and after, or have a quieter morning when you know you can do a bit more resting, and then that'll help to compensate a little bit for that busy time. The other thing to think about is deliberately putting in things that will help you. Now, I'm going to come back to what helps you with fatigue in a minute, but if you know there are things that help you, whether it's doing a relaxation technique, or sitting having a drink for a while, or reading a magazine, or calling a friend, make sure that you don't only do those when you desperately need them. Make sure that they are in your plan of activity. So the nice things are in there too to help you out. Now here we are, back to my animal theme here. So that was about being a tortoise, about planning, about varied activity, about taking things slow and steady. But really what we want to get is we want to get a bit wily here, like a fox. Because if we went back to that fable about the hare and the tortoise, the fox would not be doing either of those things. Your fox is a person who rings a taxi company and says, can't be bothered with this race, I'm just going to get in a taxi and go to the end, or has checked the bus schedules and so again hasn't even got to participate in the race. And so some of the time what we need to think is, how can I make this even easier for myself? How can I eliminate some of the stuff in the first place? Now, when you have fatigue, then essentially I often think of it as like having a budget, you know, a bit like your current account. There's a budget, there's only so much money in there. You've only got so much energy. So we can't do everything, much as we would like to, nobody can. And so what we have to think is, what is on that to-do list? What am I doing every day? And how important is it? Are there some things on that to-do list that I can eliminate completely? You know, so we're starting to ask now about what's important to me. If I've only got so much energy, am I spending it wisely? Am I spending it on the things that are most important to me? So this is when we start prioritizing, and we start thinking about, well, does this have to be done at all? Does it have to be done today? And does it have to be me that does it? So we're prioritizing some of the things as well that are on there that help us, because often what happens, and Will was talking about this in his task, so when you've got fatigue, often what goes is the fun stuff, because you're like, well, I've only got limited energy, I have to spend it all on work or domestic tasks or whatever. But we need to really think about that, because if we don't prioritize the things that add value to our lives, where can all that fun enjoyment go? And actually, in terms of bang for buck, things that help in terms of fun and enjoyment are the things that restore our energy. So we need to be very careful about it. So I often go through with people and we look at that to-do list and we end up with do it, dump it, or delegate it. Yeah. So that there are some things that we might be doing every day that actually drain a lot of our energy and we don't really need to do them at all. Here is my last P on these. So the wily fox, we have to be quite problem solvers on this. So what we're asking is, could I do this differently? I might have been doing this task in this particular way for many years in my life, but actually if I step back and think about it, might there be an easier way to do it? Now, occupational therapists love to talk about how you can change your environment and also about gadgets and technology. So for example, there might be particular gadgets there that are going to make your life a lot easier, or technology. And I'll come on to that in a second, but you'll all be aware that there are many ways that life can be easier nowadays. And that's the same thing for your environment. Have you got your environment organized, decluttered, with everything at the right height, easily accessible for you? Can you sit to do a task rather than stand? Have you got a home that's really clean and easy for you to maintain, so that actually that it's minimal work required? So it's all the time thinking about that. And that's whether you're at home or doing a leisure task or at work. You're trying to think, well, actually, how could I eliminate some of the effort that I have to make for some of these tasks? I'm going to come on here to coming back to when we're talking about gadgets and technology. Excuse me, I must have a swig of water here. Dry mouth. You'll all be familiar with that. Okay, so here we have some lovely gadgets. So you'll all be unique. You'll all have different problems that you need to contend with. But, you know, if we look here, there are a number of things out here. So in the top right-hand corner, we've got a nice lightweight Hoover. Hoovering is a task that takes an awful lot of effort. And so the lighter weight Hoover you've got, the easier that is. And then below that, you can see a cat looking a bit suspicious. Now, what is this? Well, this is actually a Hoover that does it all by remote control. Imagine you can sit on your couch, twiddle a few buttons on your remote control, and this will Hoover for you. And going around on the bottom here, this is one of the not another Hoover. I'm not hoovering my grass, I promise you. This is a lawnmower that, again, see this woman on her reclined on her lounger, and this is doing the work for her. So this is good concept. We might not all want to be having that, but at the same time, you might have other people who do these things, but there are options. And then here we are, we've got some kitchen gadgets. So again, some of these things will take a lot of the effort out of your tasks. If we come up to the top, so we've got things like perching stools. So it's often easier to sit, you know, perching to do your ironing, perching to do your washing up, or to get yourself washed and dressed. That can be much easier. And then obviously, if you have extreme fatigue, and that might be related to heart and lung issues, then, you know, you might find that stairs and things are much more challenging. So again, we have stair lifts might be an option here. And in the last corner here, we've got, if you love a bath, but you can't get in or out of it, it takes too much effort, then there are even powered bath seats. So there are lots of different gadgets on the market that can make your life a lot easier. Now, moving on here, all of you, fatigue affects all areas of your life, but also all areas of your life affect fatigue. And I often talk about this as drainers and sustainers. If we think about energy in terms of a battery, there are things that charge your battery and there are things that drain your battery. And it's really important that you all look at your individual lives and think about all the factors that could influence this. And there's so many, and they'll be specific to you. But if we think about some of these concepts here, so for example, it's really important that, you know, you have good nutrition. Your engine will not run if you haven't got good fuel in it. And when we have scleroderma, often that can be a real issue about making sure that we get the nutrients possible, getting enough calories. So that's really important to get that managed well. If you're not sleeping well, that's going to affect your fatigue. So it's really important to use every trick in the book to get your sleep. Will was talking about moving well. So we need to keep our bodies moving within our capabilities, because actually the stronger and more capable our muscles are, the more energy we will have. Relaxation. This can be really helpful, good quality rest. And we talked about doing fun and enjoyable things that can help us as well. These are the things that charge our battery. Being with people who understand what it's like, people who are going to help us out, that type of social support can be really vital. And even things like going outdoors, the effect of sunlight, being out in nature, these are things that can really sustain and provide us with energy levels. And so it's really important to think, well, are these things included? And then if we come over here and we think about, well, so what drains our battery? Have you got, and this is then about looking at that to-do list, like we said earlier, and thinking about the daily tasks that drain it. Stress. Now that is a really big drainer of your battery. Anxiety, worrying, all those types of things. Often people can think that fatigue is just about what you do, but it really isn't. There's mental fatigue. And often people find that they're more fatigued if they've got lots going on in their life, if they've got worries regarding their family, let's over the past sort of 18 months, we've had exceptional times. People are often really struggling at the moment because of the anxiety around COVID and all the additional stresses there. But let's give an example. If you were resting on the settee, having a rest, you're not actually physically doing anything. But if you're sat there worrying about things in life, that is really draining too. So we have to think about those aspects of our energy too. And again, pushing ourselves to the limit. So that is a really big battery flattener. So think about if you're in that pattern of, it's a good day, I'm going to push myself to the limits, and then you suffer for it. Other people, they often are drainers. We all know what we're going to call energy vampires that we've got in our lives. And, there are people who you've only been with for about 5 minutes and you feel like you've had the life sucked out of you. But often that might just be other things. So, you might find that you're a grandparent dealing with small children, and that's incredibly draining. You feel fatigued. And I've got on my last one here, weather. Now, you can't fully see on Zoom, but I sit here with a big jumper on and I have my winter tights on. All of you, I'm sure, will have rain on, and you'll be very familiar with this. We're in June, this isn't right. But my body today has to use a lot more energy because of what the temperature is than it would do if it was a warmer day. But equally, you could go the other way when it's really humid. That's tricky too. So just think about, maybe plot out for yourself, what affects me, what influences me. And that can then really help to think about your energy levels and what you're going to do every day to improve the situation and be mindful of the things that drain your energy. Final thoughts here. So the important thing here is about knowing yourself and what is normal for you, okay? Because we all have a level of fatigue that will be normal for us. So if that does change, if it is significantly different, then we need to think about why that is. So that can be something that you might need to, go back to your consultant with if you're suddenly experiencing a hell of a lot more. Keeping on top of your medical management of your condition is really important for those reasons as well. If your fatigue is related to specific health issues, then, again, you need to be on top of that. Knowing who to call if things suddenly change, but also, this is a hard one, but giving yourself permission to ask for help, because often we struggle with that. We fight on, we're pushing ourselves to the limits because we don't want to say to somebody, actually, I'm really struggling today, I need some help. As I said, learning about what your drainers and sustainers are and how to manage them. And here's my last one, and I think actually possibly it's the most important thing, being kind to yourself. So often, some of the trouble that we get into is because we're really hard on ourselves, really self-critical. Here we are managing with scleroderma, and we're still like, oh, I should be doing everything, I must do everything. And, we wouldn't say that to our best friends or other family members, but we often push ourselves far more than other people would. So think about some of those things, because ultimately, what we want is to be a happy sloth. And that's where we're coming from. So that hopefully some of those general principles were helpful to you. And now Zobair and I are going to go through some of the questions that hopefully you've been feeling able to share with us today. So I'm just going to stop sharing my presentation.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I really enjoyed the animal pictures.
I apologise for that. I hope it was helpful for people as an analogy. So,
but otherwise, I'm sure everybody found the presentation to be very insightful. I know I learned quite a few different things, so I'd like to thank you for that. And I would also now like to ask everybody who is watching the webinar to hover over their Zoom, and there is a section that says Q&A. If you click onto that section, you can write in your question to us, and I can put those questions to Lucy. So please, if you do have a question, do hover over and click on the Q&A section and write in your question to us. Let's just wait a moment for a few questions to come in, and we can take it from there.
You've stunned people into silence over there.
I think we have. Potentially, you may have answered all of the questions. Okay, so
Oh, I
we do
can't
have a
believe
few
that.
questions. We do have a few questions that are coming in. I think it's we've done the webinar pretty early today. So we've had a question coming from Tracy. Tracy says, "Thank you very much. It's been very helpful. As far as knowing your medical management, how do iron levels have an effect, and how often should we get that checked?"
Well, Tracy, I'm going to stray a little bit out of occupational therapy here, but I'll answer that a little bit. So some people will be affected by anemia, and that's, again, very individual. So not everybody with scleroderma would have anemia, but some people, to do with how their digestive system is functioning or their general sort of well-being, may have that. So it's always useful to have that checked as a baseline. And often that will be done routinely. So you can tell quite a lot from a normal full blood count. But often you might need your GP or your consultant will check a little bit more your sort of underlying ferritin levels. So usually it just needs a baseline check. And then if it was normal, then, you know, that would be fine. You would just carry on. If it was low, then usually somebody would be put on iron tablets. And again, then it would just be a discussion with your consultant or your GP as to how often that needs to check. So normally if you were then going on iron tablets, you do that for quite a while, and you know, then they would check it. It takes a little while for levels to come up. So yeah, not everybody would have that, but anemia can be part of the cause of fatigue. So it is relevant, but only for some people, and usually it would be monitored if it was an issue for you.
Thank you, Lucy. We've also had a question coming from Paddy. Paddy says that his mum finds it very hard to just relax. Do you have some exercises that you can share that she could potentially do?
Okay, so relaxation is probably, we could do a whole webinar on that, Paddy, but there is lots of stuff out there on the internet. So relaxation is really, really important. So often as human beings, we are do, and so we have to have time when we have downtime in, you know, as I was saying about sort of short breaks. But everybody in the entire population could probably benefit from doing relaxation. So it doesn't have to be something about managing fatigue. It can be about managing stress levels and all sorts of things. And there is lots of stuff out there on relaxation, and there's lots of apps that are available that are easy, short techniques that people can use. And I suppose underlying all relaxation is about calming our system down. And really, if we think about it, I'll talk about that. So when we are stressed and we're doing things, then we have what we call a fight and flight response. And what happens is that our energy levels go up, adrenaline gets released, our muscles tense, we're preparing for action, and we might start feeling a little bit high wired, and our digestive system shuts down. We are prepared for action. And if we're stressed all the time or we're unwell, then that can sort of keep going. So we need to come into what we're going to call the opposite of that, which is what I call rest and digest. So to get ourselves calm and rest, we need to force our system to change. And the fight and flight response is just an automatic thing that the body does. And it doesn't have conscious control. So, you know, one of the things that happens, for example, is you've got your heart rate going up and your blood pressure going up. But I can't say to you, well, what I want you to do is change your heart rate to 54 beats a minute. You just can't do it. You don't have that control. But one of the things that you do have control over is your breathing. And so essentially all relaxation and kicking us into that rest and digest phase is about knowing what's happening with our breathing and slowing it right down so that we're taking some very low, slow abdominal breaths. So ideally we should be breathing from low down in our abdomen and making the out breath longer than the in breath. So if even your mum can just sort of have a pause, put attention on the breathing and just take some low, slow breaths out from her abdomen, often you might want to count, so counting in for 3 and out for 5, for example. So what you're trying to do is get the out breath longer than the in breath. And at the base of all relaxation techniques will be about slowing that breath down. And then other relaxation techniques might use imagining that you're somewhere that you like being, imagine you're on holiday or a safe place or walking in the woods, whatever that is. So you can use your imagination to visualize. So if your mum's got somewhere that she likes being, she's got a holiday and she's imagining being lying on a beach somewhere and doing some slow breaths, then that's a very quick thing. But there is lots of apps, lots of stuff on YouTube, lots of free downloads on the internet that she could use.
Thank you, Lucy. We've had a very interesting question coming from Ellie. Ellie asks, are there any red flags before a full fatigue flare-up that you found with your own circumstance?
Okay, so this is really helpful, Ellie, and this is where I come on to, again, thinking about what's normal for you. What is your usual pattern of symptoms? So that becomes really, really important because we all are all a little bit different. And again, in terms of thinking about fatigue, so I think Will was talking on his session about all the different factors that can affect fatigue. And if the fatigue is about a disease flare, so you're having a flare because your disease has flared up and it's based on inflammation, etc., then there might be some very specific things around that. So for example, you might feel more fluey or achy, or you might notice that you're a bit more itchy, or your skin might be a bit tighter, or you might notice that your mouth is a bit drier, or your eyes are a bit drier. So there might be other disease symptoms that you associate with your scleroderma that show that your whole disease process is a bit more active. Because if that type of disease flare will always then come with a fatigue flare. So if you are generally more unwell, then you'll find that you will be more fatigued. And those are definitely, when I was talking about, about managing, knowing about the medical management and knowing yourself, that's really important to know, what is normal for you, because if that's part of the whole disease flare picture, then that's something that you absolutely need to be having a consultation with, with your consultant or your GP about. So there are not specific things, but like I say, it's probably about your normal disease picture, and you might find, like I say, for me, it was always like that. I feel fluey, I might feel low in mood as well. And often if your fatigue is high, you might feel a bit more emotional. You might feel like you're going to break into tears a bit more. So there might be all those types of things, but it's probably just that you feel exhausted. You might feel more achy, and your disease just generally doesn't feel as well controlled. So definitely that type of fatigue is usually red flags. I hope that makes sense and answers that a little bit.
Thank you, Lucy. We've also had another question coming from Hayley, who says, do you have any recommendations for comfortable shoes? Sore feet and ankles deter me from wanting to go out walking.
Okay, so again, we're all different here. The better your shoes are, the more comfortable you're going to be, and probably the less energy you're going to expend walking. There are, again, lots of different companies on the market that you can go to. Sometimes it's also important to go and speak to maybe a podiatrist or a chiropodist about this, because a lot of people benefit from having some very specific insoles made for their feet, because often we can have all sorts of issues with our feet related to scleroderma. Often you lose fat pads, you can feel like you're walking on pebbles. And again, if you've got pain in the small joints of your feet or ankles, then it can be very uncomfortable. So actually, sometimes it's better to go and see a specialist and get advice from them before you go and buy shoes. But basically, any shoes that give you a lot of cushioning from the underneath, give you good support underneath your feet, and give you a little bit of support around your ankles will be fine. But I'm not going to sort of say a specific brand, because there isn't one specific brand. Again, all our feet are different. I can think of a lady that I particularly know, and she spends her life in UGG boots because they keep her feet warm and they're comfortable. So that's good. There's also a company called Vivo Barefoot, and so often they're recommended as well. They can be very helpful. But even just, you know, Clark shoes that are good quality shoes is fine. There's lots of good brands on the market there. So
Thank you, Lucy. We've had a question coming from Edith, and Edith says, first and foremost, thank you for such an excellent webinar. She then goes on to ask, is fatigue also linked to poor diet issues?
So Edith, absolutely it can be. And again, we're all unique in terms of scleroderma. Most people with scleroderma will often have some dietary issues in terms of how well they digest stuff. So it can be quite common to have issues where perhaps you're not getting the normal vitamins and minerals that somebody else would. Perhaps you're not digesting them in the same way, or perhaps your system is not using them quite as effectively. So if for example, you know, you weren't getting enough calories in, or you weren't getting enough vitamin D or enough iron, as we alluded to earlier, then yes, it really would make a difference to your fatigue levels. So it's really important that you do have enough calories coming in, and that they're good quality calories, and that, like I say, you're getting a good balance between your vitamins and minerals. And if you have any concerns, then most units will have a dietitian linked to them. And so it's really helpful to speak to somebody about that. Or, you know, your GP might be able to do some basic routine bloods to check that out for you. Often the things that make the biggest difference are, like we said, about iron levels and calorie intake. Vitamin D is a common thing as well. Often when people can be low on vitamin D, and that can definitely affect their immune system and their fatigue levels. So it's always worth getting that checked out. But most people, again, I'm going to come back to this lovely June weather that we're experiencing and what May was like. So in Britain, it's really unlikely that you're going to just be able to get enough vitamin D from sunlight. So most people benefit from taking a supplement. So yeah, that can be very helpful too. I think sometimes in terms of, let's think about energy levels and going back to what we were talking about fatigue, when you feel fatigued, there can be a real a drive, an inner drive sometimes to do something to try and boost your energy quickly. And sometimes people will go, oh, I'll have a cup of coffee so we can caffeine fuel ourselves to perk ourselves up a little bit. And sometimes you might just hit the Lucozade because that might give you a sugar burst, or the Mars bars and things like that. So sometimes we do that type of dietary thing. Or again, it might be that because we're so fatigued, we're not eating properly, i.e. it's just too much effort and energy to cook for ourselves. And so we don't look after ourselves in quite the same way. We might snack more rather than actually prepare meals. So sometimes those types of habits can also lead to a boom and bust in terms of sugar levels. So if we take on sugar levels or caffeine, we get the initial boom, and then we get that where we feel even more fatigued after we've had them. And like we said, if we're not eating properly, then we aren't getting sustained nutrition. Bear in mind, again, if from an OT perspective, if you struggle with meal preparation, there is nothing wrong with, you know, I'm sure a lot of you will do it anyway, but, you know, frozen vegetables are all right in my eyes. The microwave ping meal is perfectly all right sometimes. The takeaway meal is perfectly all right sometimes. And just making it really easy for yourself to, you know, any trick or tip to make food prep really easy, you know, in terms of gadgets in your kitchen, or like we said, the stuff that is done, all the pre-prep veg that are out there, anything that makes it easier, you know, then, you know, that can help as well.
Thank you very much, Lucy. So we've got another question that's coming from Melanie. It's a bit of a complicated one. It says, what exercise would you suggest for someone with lung involvement? Also, how much vitamin D should you take every day when you already take AdCal? So I know you touched upon vitamin D with the last question.
Yeah, Melanie, I don't know whether you would have seen Will's seminar, but I think there was a question, wasn't there, Zobair, about somebody who had lung involvement when he was doing that. So Will would be more the expert on terms of that. I think with exercise, again, it's very personal. If you have scleroderma, it's really helpful to go and speak to one of your local physiotherapists, because it's about tailoring that exercise very specifically for you. And if you have lung involvement, then also that might be in consultation with your consultant respiratory physician or GP, so it gets much tailored to you. So that, because there isn't a specific thing, it's about what you can do, and having a comfortable baseline and doing it consistently. So, you know, Will was talking about exercise snacking, essentially, wasn't he? About doing little amounts regularly, which is what we were talking about in terms of pacing. So if you're exercising, it's about knowing what you can comfortably do and doing it little and often, rather than doing a lot and then exhausting yourself. So I hope that sort of covers it. And if you didn't see Will's, then there is a link on the website to go back to have a look at that. In terms of vitamin D, it isn't an exact science, as in it's this amount. And if you're already on AdCal, and then it sounds like somebody's already managing that with you. So it might just be worth a discussion again with your consultant, because you'll be having the calcium, but you need vitamin D to make calcium work. So if you're not on any, then again, check that out with your GP or your consultant, because there isn't a magic number. It's very individual to you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. We've also had a question coming from Shirley. Shirley says, I used to do long distance walks, so it's very frustrating that these are out of the question now. I got down to only being able to walk for a mile. I have persevered and can now do 3 miles, but the last mile is sometimes a struggle. Should I keep trying to slowly up the mileage?
Okay, so Shirley, I'm going to be similar to you in this. So I used to do a lot of walking before I had scleroderma, and I know exactly what you mean. It's incredibly frustrating when you can't do what you used to do, and this goes for all activities, not just walking. Ultimately, what we're often resisting is, none of us want to have scleroderma. None of us want to be limited in any way, and it is really, really difficult, because it is a condition that limits you in so many ways. And the frustration and the anger and the irritation, all that comes up for these, is really difficult. And I think good on you that you are still able to do these things. So if we can't do what we used to do, then we have to do the next best thing, which is what we can do. And trying to find a way where we still can be active, but at a more manageable level. Now, you are doing incredibly well if you can do 3 miles. I personally, I can't do 3 miles. A mile would be a lot for me. So what I tend to do is I do a different type of exercise, which I do, which is called Qigong, which is like Tai Chi, because it's more manageable. I can also do it at home, and I can do it regularly. And by doing that, I have upped my capacity. And so I can now do walks where I couldn't do walks. So I couldn't really walk for more than about 10 minutes. But now I've got it up, so I can probably do about 40 minutes an hour, but that might push me. So I you know, it is difficult, but you're doing really well, because like I say, I can't manage it. And there's probably a lot of people on this webinar who probably can't. I would say you don't have to push yourself to those limits. If you can do a mile comfortably regularly, that is very much better for your system than pushing yourself to do 3 miles and suffering from it, because that might just be well beyond your capacity. And it's not only your energy levels, it's we can easily push ourselves into a disease flare if we do too much all the time. If we are constantly if we're constantly pushing to our upper limit, then like I say, it isn't just that we might get more fatigue, we might flare our condition. So we really don't want to be in that. We have to listen to our bodies and know what's comfortable and do that regularly. And if you can regularly comfortably do a mile, or you can regularly comfortably do 3 miles, that's fine. You don't have to push yourself to the limits. It's just enough to keep yourself as active as possible within your sort of capabilities, really. So don't push yourself, but good to keep walking, absolutely.
Thank you, Lucy. So you can push yourself, but that doesn't always mean pushing yourself to the absolute limit. Fantastic.
Yes.
So we've had a very interesting question coming from Diane. Diane says, going back to pacing, would you consider having a 5-minute screen break during the hour of this webinar between the presentation and the Q&A? It may give us a chance to think of questions too, or do you think it would break up the flow too much? I'd love to hear your opinion, Lucy.
Diane, I completely agree with you. You can imagine what it's like for me and Zobair. Here we are, we've got to concentrate for the full hour here. I can't just have a nap. That would be nice, wouldn't it? So I think any screen time, I often say to people, you know, if you're on the screen, actually, most of us only got a concentration span for about 20 minutes anyway. You know, you'd probably all switched off about 10 minutes into my presentation anyway. And so we're all a bit like that. And so I absolutely agree, it can be. When I am doing groups at work, we always have breaks. So we have half an hour breaks as well. So we do a section, then we have a break, and then we come back. So I completely agree with you. And in a normal, you know, scheme of things, then yes, we should have practiced what we're preaching. But the beauty of these webinars is that because they're being recorded, you can watch them in your own leisure time, and you can sort of watch a bit, go off and do something else, and then come back to them. So yeah, and yes, there's always it probably would break the flow a bit, but you know, sometimes it's worth doing it. But probably within the context of this, it's not quite so easy.
Thanks for your opinion there, Lucy, and thank you, Diane, for posing that question. It's something that we'll consider. We're always trying to improve our webinars, and if anybody else has any recommendations as to how we can improve, please do add them into the chat function or the Q&A function. We always try and take these into consideration. Moving on to the next question, we've got one that's coming from Laura. Laura says, great to hear your tips, Lucy. I definitely overdo it on a good day. Would you recommend letting employers know about scleroderma? I was diagnosed last year during the pandemic, so I'm not sure whether I can manage a full week in the office as I used to or not.
Yeah, Laura, I think it's always, well, again, some employers are better than others. That, you know, that's the reality. Some employers are lovely and they're incredibly supportive and they'll bend over backwards to help you out. Other people, they don't understand, and so, you know, that can be more challenging. So, you know, let's hope that you've got the former rather than the latter. I think it is always worth being open and honest about it, and providing them with some literature. You know, you can direct them to the SRUK website and all the good handouts that are on there. So I think you really do need to have that discussion, because I think, you know, it's probably likely that if not now, at some point, you might find that working full time will be a challenge to you. And again, it's really difficult to tell. And I don't know what your job is, Laura, but, you know, sometimes, like, because of the pandemic. So for some people, they've been working from home. I've been working from home, and that's been much better for me. I've been able to manage my condition a lot better from working from home, because I can get up, move around, have breaks, do different things, rather than, you know, when I'm in work. And also I've not got the full getting up in the morning, getting to my car, getting into work, and the same thing at the reverse end. So lots of, you know, things about working from home will have you know, made life easier. And if your normal job is a full-time in work, you know, then you might find that incredibly challenging. So I would have that conversation with somebody and say, look, I've been diagnosed with this is the implications of it, and work with them. So scleroderma comes under the Equality Act. So employers are supposed to make reasonable adjustments for you. And that might not just be about your energy levels, it might also be about pain or restrictions in your movement, or to do with your circulation, or, you know, it could be anything that your scleroderma limits you in. So it's really important to have that conversation with them. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucy. Laura also asks later on, does exercise usually help boost overall energy levels or sap them? Is it important to do even if it tires us to keep our strength up? So
again, Laura, going back to what Will was saying. So there's that balance there. So as I was saying at the beginning of the presentation, fatigue feels horrible. So the temptation is you feel so fatigued, you want to do nothing, that you need to feel like you need to rest, lie down in a darkened room and hope that, your energy levels will come back. And if you are doing nothing, then absolutely what's going to happen is you're going to lose strength and stamina. The cardiovascular system is not going to be so efficient. And when your muscles aren't so efficient, they then can't help you in terms of taking some of the strain off your heart and lungs. So the more efficient your body is, the more efficiently it works, and the more energy we would have. So that's important to recognize. But at the same time, you can't push yourself to the absolute limits. If you're then on the other end of that spectrum where you're trying to exercise all the time, you will then go the other way and tire yourself out. So we want to find somewhere in the middle ground. We want to find the same with activities. Coming back to what we were talking about pacing, we need to know what our comfortable baseline is. And it's better to start low, know we're on a 70% capacity rather than pushing ourselves to 100%, and then keep doing that consistently. And that way we're keeping ourselves active, we keep using our muscles, we're keeping our strength and our flexibility. We're not pushing ourselves to the point where we do so much that we then need 3 days rest, because in that time when we're resting, we're getting that deconditioning. And then when we go back to try and do what we used to do, we're already on the back foot. So our body isn't in quite as good a place. So it's trying to find that middle ground, working with it is what I often call about, rather than pushing against it or struggling against it. A bit like what we were saying when we were talking about Shirley's issue of walking. So it's important to keep doing it, important to keep doing exercise, but finding your level. So, and a bit like I said for me, so it's important I walk regularly, but if I regularly do too much, it's no good for me. That will sap my energy. Whereas if I'm consistently doing it, I'm helping. Hopefully that makes sense there.
Thank you, Lucy. So now we move on to our last question. I do apologize for the remaining 5 questions that we haven't been able to answer. We'll look into answering those somehow after the webinar. The last question comes from Liz, who asks, how do we spell Qigong? She wants to look it up. I should probably know this.
Sorry, Qigong. Qigong. But what I'm going to say here is, and here's a little plug because we haven't done it as yet. So on the conference, the SRUK conference, which is going to be on September the 11th this year, the gentleman who I do Qigong with is going to be doing a session. So you will all be able to see what it is. Like I say, it's like it's a static form of Tai Chi. So yeah, it's quite a gentle exercise.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Lucy. And that takes us on very nicely to the virtual conference. If you'd like to sign up to the virtual conference, which will be taking place in the first half of September, I've just added in the link to the chat function. So that's where you can click on to sign up to that virtual conference. But otherwise, we're now at the end of the webinar. And I'd like to say a huge thank you to yourself, Lucy, for joining us today, and for your continued efforts with SRUK and your dedication to scleroderma and Raynaud's throughout the years. It's been a joy having you on. And I'm sure our audience agree, and no doubt so much positive feedback and comments have come in already. I'd also like to thank our audience for making the session what it is, for all of your amazing questions. It was a bit of a slow start in the beginning, but in the end there was an overflow. So thank you for getting those questions to us, and for your continued support and involvement as always. If you do find these webinars very helpful, again, I'd like to remind you that you can support future webinars by making a donation of £5. You can do so by texting SRUK SAM to 70450. Text costs £5 plus 1 standard rate message. And I've added that information into the chat. We've already discussed the virtual conference coming up in September, and we've got the link in the chat function for you to sign up. So I look forward to hopefully seeing you all there. And lastly, if there are any ways you believe we can improve the webinars, please do let us know. Please do get in contact with us and let us know. We may potentially be putting out a evaluation survey link over the coming days. So please do keep a lookout for that on our social media and let us know how we can improve as we do our best to try and tailor these webinars to best suit you. But otherwise, I'd like to say thank you to everybody, and a huge thank you to yourself again, Lucy. And I wish you all a lovely day and a lovely rest of the week. But take good care. And we're now signing off. So take good care, everyone. Take care,
Bye,
Lucy.
everybody. Look after
Bye-bye.
yourself.
Bye-bye, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.